Okay, awesome. Samantha, I want to double check the captions are on, right?
There's a live captioner
perfect.
assigned, but I don't see the captions either.
We'll just wait a minute.
Or somebody talk to see the captions.
Hi, just testing for captions, testing for captions. Gonna keep testing for captions.
That person,
I see them.
yeah,
I see them as well. I think we're good to go.
Okay, great.
Okay, hello everyone and welcome. This is the Student Empowerment Panel and my name is Aisha and we're going to get into introductions in a little bit. Today we are going to be talking about reflecting on barriers, financial or otherwise, that students face when accessing course materials, talking about strategies for student advocates to work with administrators, faculty, librarians, and the best practices for partnerships between these two. So we're going to go ahead and get into introductions.
So hi everyone, my name is Winnie, like Winnie the Pooh. And I am the Open Education Project Manager at Spark. I work with Nicole, Haley, and Aisha. I am also currently pursuing a Juris Doctor at W&L Law in Virginia. And prior to that, I've worked in education and specifically focusing on initiatives that get us closer towards equity in education, and open education is a part of that. Great.
All right. And hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. I see a lot of new faces in the audience. So hello, my name is Haley Babb. I'm also part of the Spark Open Education team as an Open Education Project Manager. I'm personally based in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. So I bring a lot of the Canadian perspective to the Spark team. I'm coming from a background in student government, like everyone on the Spark Open Education team. I served as Vice President Academic and President of the University of Lethbridge Students' Union way back from about 2016 to 2018. So it's been a little while, but I'm excited to be here today to talk about my experience in student leadership and just sort of share some of the things that I've learned as I've transitioned into more of a young professional role. So yeah, very excited to chat a little bit more.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aisha, and I am the Open Education Coordinator at Spark. I attended a community college, Montgomery College, and then I got my associates from there and went on to graduate from the University of Maryland with a degree in education policy last year in 2020. I was the first class to graduate during the pandemic, I always say, which is not a flex. It is a cry for help. I didn't get to walk. So, but I'm going to be talking about my experience being a student advocate specifically on a community college campus and the things that arise in that context, as well as a little bit of work I did pushing for against the rising cost of textbooks. So I'm excited to talk to everybody about that. And I hope we have some community college representation in the crowd. All right.
Well, so we'll start off with my kind of story about working at a larger public institution. I was the student body president there from 2016 to 2017. Oh, yeah, 2016, 2017. I had to remember the years. So I worked on as one of the 3 top initiatives there for me. One of them was decreasing the cost of textbooks. And with that came the discovery of kind of open education. And that's kind of how I got started with open education. And in my experience, I think there are a few things that really help. And I've named them down to these 3. The first is collecting data. So at our school, we started off with a survey. The story of actually how I got started with running as a candidate was that I was surveying students about the issues that really matter to them and what were issues that they cared about. And over again, number one was the rising cost of textbooks. Students were complaining about how much textbooks are going up. And of course, with that tuition and just overall expenses. But number one was textbooks. And so I wanted to do a little bit more discovery and figure out what data was unique to my campus. So we launched a survey that went out to the student body. It had roughly 15 or so questions, and there were questions like, how much do your textbooks cost? And do you buy all of your required materials? And what has, who pays for your textbooks? Is it loaned? Is it parent funded? Is it personal? And how much is your most expensive textbook? So we ask all of these questions to try to get an understanding of what our campus specifically looks like. And the reason we did that was because we find that when we speak to administrators about issues, especially higher level administrators, it's very easy to kind of say, oh yeah, this is a national statistic. And it's very also easy for the administrator to say, well, that's not happening on our campus. But it's less easy for administrators to say that when the data comes from your campus. And so what I found that's always helpful in identifying an issue is first collecting that data. So I'll share with you a few things that we actually found in the data. So we had about 87% of students say that either they didn't purchase a required textbook because of cost, they took fewer courses as a result of textbook costs, they didn't register for a specific course for that reason, or they earned a poor grade because they couldn't afford the textbooks, or they dropped a course or failed a course as a result of all of not being able to buy the textbook for the course, or just having that cost be that barrier. And we took all of this data there to the provost as well as our student affairs director, and we were able to kind of build a plan to see, okay, what is a good way to move forward and start developing a way for us to decrease this cost. And so luckily our provost was already very kind of in tune with open education and wanted to start a pilot program on our campus. And so we worked together to build out that pilot program, which brings me to my second point, which is building a plan. I think building the plan gave us the ability to talk to all the stakeholders on the campus, gave us an ability to incentivize the program for faculty members who were concerned about that, and also just brought everyone to the table, students and faculty, to talk about the issues and concerns that they had, and also give us an opportunity to debunk a few myths about open education. So through kind of collecting data, then we were able to build that plan. Then in that plan, we were able to go through a year of kind of debunking myths and figuring out what students needed. And I would say that the biggest thing through all three of those, if you're thinking about doing these at your institution and you're not a student, is to include students in the process and have students at the table. If they're not there, in my experience, the plan is not really for students, and you can kind of see that trend starting to happen with textbook affordability programs across the country. So just the biggest thing that you can do if you're not a student is to kind of look around the room and say, where is the student? And that would be the most important takeaway. Okay, I think Haley is there.
All right. Thanks, Winnie. That was awesome. I always, every time I get to hear about Winnie and Aisha, it's always just such a pleasure for me as well, because we work together every day, but we don't always get to talk about our glory days of student leadership. So yeah, I'm here to talk a little bit about my time in student government on north of the American border. So like I said, I served 2 years with my students union at my institution, the University of Lethbridge. That's located a little bit south of Calgary, for those of you who are familiar with Canadian geography. It was a campus of about 9,000 students. So I'd say sort of on the Canadian landscape, that's sort of the lower end of like a mid-size university, or smaller end, I should say. So that's what we were working with. I was elected in 2016, and Canada is actually quite lucky to have a very robust student leader infrastructure. You'll find at most of the larger universities, students who are elected into these positions, they have an office, they have a building, they have staff, they are only allowed to take 1 or 2 classes per semester because it's treated like a full-time job. So already, you know, we're given some resources to make us successful in these roles. And I think there's a lot that can be done when students are lucky enough to have access to those resources, but I just wanted to recognize right off the bat that, you know, not all students do. And a lot of students who are doing this work are doing so on top of a full course load, on top of a part-time job or 2. So just wanted to start that off before I chatted a little bit further. So in my own experience, as soon as I got into my role, I was in a role called Vice President Academic, and that role was responsible for sort of the internal affairs of the university. So I was approached by another student leader at another university in the province who was interested in doing a joint advocacy campaign surrounding OERs. And I've never really heard of OERs. This campaign was the Textbook Broke campaign. I had never heard of Textbook Broke, but I said, you know, this sounds like an awesome initiative. I'd love to do it. So we did a joint campaign. It was the first of its kind in the province of Alberta, and we were lucky to have quite a bit of sort of press around that. It really perked the ears of a lot of policymakers, which was exciting. At my own campus, University of Lethbridge, there were a few people on campus already who were quite passionate about this issue, but the dots hadn't quite been connected. So this, unbeknownst to me, taking on this campaign of, you know, asking students how much they'd spent on their textbooks, drawing attention to the issue, was a really good opportunity to join those stakeholders. So as a result of our advocacy, you know, not only did we raise the profile of this issue in the province, but at my institution, at least, we were able to join a working group together of different allies throughout the university. So from that, a few things have come out of it: an institutional grant, some more infrastructure around that, and that's all been the result of, like I said, institutional partnerships and joint advocacy around that. And I think that's sort of a theme throughout my personal story. Canada also has a pretty robust student advocacy network. So at both the provincial and the federal level, you will find student organizing groups who, you know, have really figured out for a group of, you know, students who are most often sort of in their mid-20s, they've really got advocacy figured out, and it's a really fantastic thing to watch. So I was lucky enough to be part of 2 delegations. One was the Council of Alberta University Students. That was our provincial lobby group, as well as the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations, which is the federal group. And so during our annual advocacy week on Parliament Hill in Ottawa for the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations, students who are elected on a year term come together and get to determine their priorities for the year. Those are then sort of taken and drafted into white papers, research papers, and then we spend a whole week on the Hill where we get to lobby policymakers directly. And so that's a very exciting process. Luckily, OERs did make it into the priorities the year that I was president and that we went to the Hill. There was a lot of real multi-partisan support for the issue, which was something that really surprised me as we sort of move into a more political space in both the US and Canada. And we were actually had enough interest that CASA was invited to speak at the Federal Budget Committee, I believe in November 2017. So for those of you who were at the student plenary yesterday, my good friend Shifra Gadamzadi was actually our chair at the time, and that was the advocacy effort that she referred to in her keynote talk. So that again, I think just highlights you know, the importance of joint advocacy. We were able to get that far. Unfortunately, the ask that we had didn't make it into the final federal budget. But I think it was one of the closest moves at the federal level that's ever happened in Canada. So, you know, it was an incredible experience to join forces with those other students and to have policymakers hear directly from students. I think for me, something that I really took out of that experience, because I was able to be trained by professional lobbyists, was that I was an expert in my own lived experience as a student. And that was something that at first for me, you know, was really challenging. I was really intimidated to go and talk to all these policymakers and say, hi, I'm just so-and-so student from little old Southern Alberta, and I'm here to ask for, $8 million to create this pilot grant. But I found myself saying things like, hello, member of parliament, so-and-so, I'd like you to know that, university is really expensive, and they'd just be shocked. All these things that, not necessarily shocked, but things that seemed very commonplace to me were just not to policymakers. And so it was very, I guess, legitimizing for me to go through that experience. But I know that a lot of other student leaders don't necessarily have that. So another piece of advice I want to leave you with is just to help students feel empowered in their own, their own knowledge, their own experience. There's many different ways to do that. Inviting them to the table is a big one, and I know that we'll get there. That's something that we'll touch on throughout the presentation. I know I'm taking up a lot of time, so I'm going to wrap us up. The last thing I just wanted to talk about was this whole notion of empowering. So it's something that I've sort of strived to do in my own personal life, just talking to other student leaders who are interested in this movement. And helping them, again, to feel like they can stand on their own 2 feet in those meetings and feel like they do have the answers. So I've been lucky enough to speak at a few conferences sort of about that, and I'm obviously more than happy to chat about it a little bit more today. So I'm going to stop and pass it along to my colleague Aisha to talk about her experience.
Well, hello, everyone. Aisha again. Thank you, Haley and Winnie, for sharing your experiences. So I wanted to share about my experience being a student leader and kind of how I got into open education. And, there's so many students doing amazing advocacy work. And during my time as a student leader, I didn't actually focus that much on I didn't focus at all on open education, but I did advocate for Z courses, which I'm going to talk to a bit about today. But I also really just want to talk about engaging students specifically in the community college context, which is something that I have experience with. And it's just something that's different than being at a 4-year university because demographics tend to be different. It's a 2-year institution. It's easier for students to be less engaged, which I'll be getting into. So I want to talk a bit about my experience, pushing against the rising cost of textbooks, as well as bringing community college students and administrators, faculties, librarians together on a common issue. So one of the first things I want to discuss is understanding variety, that students come from a variety of backgrounds. And this is something that was a challenge as a student leader, specifically the campus that I went to, Montgomery College. I know I'm a little box in the screen right now, but I'm wearing a Montgomery College sweatshirt because I'm a huge Raptor. And Montgomery College is based in Maryland. And one of the huge challenges I had as the student leader, so I was first part of the Student Senate, which is the SGA at MC, but they call it the Student Senate. I was a senator, and then I went on to be the president my sophomore year. And I was also the vice chair of the Student Council, and this was in 2017, 2018 academic year. So I can't do math, I'm not gonna try. But it was some years ago. And there's specifically, I don't want to speak for all community colleges, but specifically my experience that I had, the demographics were very diverse. The main population ethnic background was African American and or Black. And then there was different ages. So there was people who were, continuing education. I believe almost like 20% of the students were over 30. And then there's also younger students. So we have dual enrollment, high school students who are taking college classes while they're still in high school. And then there's early placement students. I was an early placement student, people who start college before 18. And people are here for so many different reasons and come from different cultural backgrounds, a lot of international students. A handful of my friends that I made there were international students, one from Peru, one from Indonesia. Like, it's just so many different backgrounds, so many different cultures. And you really have to strive to kind of understand where different people are coming from, because that can help you better understand how to work with them, which is really important. And one of the biggest takeaways I got, because it's so easy, especially in a community college aspect, which I sometimes saw from administrators and faculty, and not that often, because honestly, administrators at Montgomery College were really good at involving students, but sometimes it seemed like they didn't understand that people had different experiences and different lives. And, there was people who were married and with kids, there was people working full time. And it seemed like they didn't understand that students had other things going on in their lives. So one of the biggest things that I walked away from this experience with is really emphasizing empathy and understanding on all sides, and understanding of different people's backgrounds and what's important to them. And that just helps you better work with people. So that's a huge thing that I wanted to emphasize while I was talking today. And the next thing is mobilizing community college students, which is really, really hard. And that's a huge challenge I had. Students aren't there for long. It's typically 2 years. Some students don't even stay the 2 years. They just stay a year. They just stay a semester. A lot of community colleges don't have on-campus housing. So specifically the one I was at had no on-campus housing. So that makes it less of a community vibe. People were like off campus by like 3 p.m., 4 p.m. It's like kind of a ghost town at times. And then also different reasons why they're there. So there's some people who are just taking classes for fun. There's some people returning to school. They already have a master's and they're just taking a few classes. So it's hard to mobilize so many different interests. But one thing, especially with open education and textbooks, is it's easy to mobilize people, to convince them that, you shouldn't pay $200 for a textbook. I have never met a student that was like, I love paying that amount. So that is one thing that is great with open education. And I think specifically when it comes to mobilizing community college students about open education, about OER, about Z courses, whatever it may be, is just that raising awareness, because a lot of students do not have the time to do that research and to even know that exists. I didn't find out to my sophomore year that Z courses were even a thing. And I was like, why is this not heavily promoted? Then I took all Z courses my sophomore year, and it was a huge send. I remember I was telling everybody, I was like, do you know these things called Z courses? Are you guys signed up? And everyone was like, what? So that's a huge thing with mobilizing community college students in the OE space, is just raising that awareness that it exists. And then going back to my first point of understanding students from a variety of different backgrounds, being willing to kind of work with students because they come from different backgrounds. So offering different opportunities, asynchronous, virtual. Not all students can come to campus and attend a meeting. Having them be able to maybe fill out a survey on their own time, because having a student body and a student government that is very involved, even student government, we had problems at times with members, not being able to commit the way that we liked. People don't realize that it's a privilege to have students pour themselves into student government. That is not always something that is a thing. And specifically when I was president, a lot of the students in the government were working full time, had their other stuff going on. So it's a lot to ask for a student to volunteer their time, emphasize on volunteering, because they're not being paid, they're paying you, as in paying the college. So that's really important to keep in mind. And then my last point I want to say is that working with admin, not against, is the biggest thing that I kind of walked away from. And when I say admin, I mean faculty, librarians, everyone. Just couldn't fit that all in that tiny yellow box. But at times it can very much feel like, it's students against everybody else, or it's administrators against students, and it's this fight. And one of the biggest things that I got from positive things that administration did right while I was a student leader at Montgomery College is that it always felt like we were a team. It always felt like we were on the same side, and we were working on something that would benefit both of us. Because what I learned as a student leader is that administration, faculty, librarians, they have their challenges too. They have these barriers that they're also up against. And I didn't even think of that as a student, which is why I really want to say empathy and understanding on all sides is really important. because it's easy to think that, well, administrators, they're getting paid, they're well off from a student perspective, but there's also challenges that come on that side as well. So being able to mutually understand each other and build something that works between the both of us was really nice. And I think that, students should keep in mind, if there's students listening, that's something that's really important to keep in mind. And then those who are faculty, librarians, administrators, also keep in mind that, we're all a team at the end of the day, and we're looking out for what's best for the entire institution and learning and students and faculty and instructors, all of that. So, yeah. So we all shared a little bit about our experiences as student leaders. Does anyone have questions? Sam, I see your comment. Yeah, it is such a privilege to have students engage and participate. Yes, I would say the difference between me going from a community college to a four-year institution is that four-year institution, the student government was all in. They were all political science majors. They all wanted to run for office. There was barely any political science majors when I was a student leader at Montgomery College. There was all these different backgrounds. Most of my friends aren't even interested in politics now. It's just something that they did for fun, and that they were into it for the moment, but it's a completely different experience at other institutions. Like when I was at the University of Maryland, the student government took that so seriously, like in the best way possible. And like they took it as a job, and which is really great to have student government like that, but that's not always the case. And that's not always a realistic expectation for student bodies to put in that much effort. See your comment here. We do have some questions, some common questions that we can pass on over. Haley or Winnie, I don't know if either of you want to take these.
Yeah, are there any, oh, go ahead.
You go
Haley.
ahead.
Okay, I was saying if there were any questions from the audience members first, and then if there aren't, we'll jump into some of these. Everyone.
I'm happy to talk. I just noticed, Sam, how can we replicate fund roles in community college? And I thought I'd just talk about, like, I'm happy to clarify how it works in Canada. We have, at least sort of province by province, higher education is a provincial jurisdiction. So where I live in Alberta, we actually have legislation that mandates that our student unions have to exist. The institution can't get rid of us. And then as like a literal union, we are able to collect fees from students, which we then use to do like student health and dental, bus passes, gym passes, those sorts of things. So that's how it works here. But yeah, just wanted to say too, like, I think we intend for the rest of the session to be pretty informal, casual. Like, we're happy to chat more about our own experiences, happy to hear a little bit from you about what challenges that you're facing on your campus. So, do feel free to, I guess, like, be engaged in the chat, and we'll do our best to solve all your problems.
And I'll just echo that in Texas, there's also that same legislation that every public institution has to have a student government. And as a matter of fact, they also have to have a student fees advisory committee, which means that students are responsible for allocating the student fees that go into an institution. So that usually looks like, for the big public institutions here, like upwards of $20 million that the students get. And then also usually the student government positions are also funded to a certain extent. It's definitely not hourly, it's just kind of like a stipend. And if you break it down, it is not at all minimum wage or anything like that. But there is some compensation for certain. I know that not all institutions do that. Yeah, so. Okay, I think there's a question for you, Aisha, for the zero course markings.
Yeah, can someone explain exactly what course markings are?
Yeah, so it's like the marks next to course catalog that'll say this is a zero course,
Oh,
zero
yeah,
course.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and the student schedule that was made clear, but it was never publicized exactly what Z courses were when I was there. It does say, I do remember it saying on the catalog exactly, let me turn my camera on, like Z courses, you don't have to pay for any course materials. But it wasn't ever shared that those courses even exist. I just happened to enroll with one by accident. And then I was like, this is amazing. So Samantha works at Montgomery College, which is where I attended. I'm not entirely sure how long you worked there, Sam. I don't know if you were there while I was a student, but oh my gosh, you were. It's crazy that we have never crossed paths.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Oh, wow.
So Aisha, just to, because we're talking about that, I mean, you're making me cry because that was the first thing we said is how do we get this available to students? And we had such a hard time connecting with students and being able to get their feedback. And so we had these designators, they were searchable. I mean, from the very first semester we implemented, this was like 2015, the very first semester we had them there. We had stuff up online that described what everything was, but still students didn't know. And we couldn't figure out how to break that barrier. So while your experience makes me cry, it also, because I'm like, we tried, I think some advice from you guys about how do we do that particularly in environments like where Haley has, a paid, not necessarily paid position, but a very prominent, very, a position that gives her some central ability to do that. At community colleges, as I was saying before, we don't have that. So how do we do that? How do we do that without taking advantage of students in ways that are not comfortable? How do we do that?
Aisha, Winnie, do either of you want to take a crack at that?
Go ahead.
Sure, I guess, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind, like at the end of the day, students go to post-secondary to learn. They also go to have an experience. They go to build work experience. They go to, become somebody who can enter the workforce. So there's lots of things that incentivize students outside of, buying them pizza or entering a raffle to win a gift card. Like I think first and foremost, I guess to rewind a little bit, students, especially new students who are, undergraduates or being in this world for the first time, the biggest thing that you can do is cut down on their time and labor of trying to figure this thing out by, laying it out for them. Like how does this issue work? Who are the people at the institution who already know about this? Who are exactly the people that you should be talking to once you find students who are sort of interested in this work, but then also how can you compensate them for that time? So I know that, finances are one thing. You can pay a student to be part of a role, but I know that that's not always an option for people. Can you be writing them a letter that outlines the experience that they had, that, certifies that they've done however many hours that they can put in their resume and take forward? Can you offer them a semester-long study for course credit? Are there other things that you can be doing that get them closer to their goal, give them some experience under their belt that will help differentiate them from other students, while taking away the barriers for them? The biggest thing for students is they come in and it's so overwhelming. There's the time aspect of it, but there's also just the bureaucracy of the institution. And that's something where, a faculty member or a librarian, your experience in navigating that bureaucracy and your knowledge of how it works can come together with the students' lived experience of, being somebody who's involved in this issue, and you two can sort of join forces I think sometimes students don't always realize the amount they can get away with. Students have a lot more agency to be able to say things at tables that an institutional person might not be able to. So just approaching that student with kindness, helping them understand what their agency is I think a good place to start.
Yeah, so I can jump in next. I think that most people's intuition, I think a few people this is the number one asked question, which is why it's question one, is I've tried reaching out or I can't seem to get students at the table. I think everyone's intuition to approach the Student Government Association is right. They're kind of they're working on student issues. They're kind of the central nexus point for that. I would say that approaching the student body president, if you're not seeing results there, they have usually 1 year, 2 semesters, counting the days that people aren't really in office. So they have 1 year to kind of create whatever programs that they're trying to get. And usually they're focusing on 1 or 2 things, 1 or 2 major initiatives. And this may not be something that's completely on their radar. Or this is not something that they're willing to pursue, which is completely fine if they have other more pressing issues. So if you're seeing, that you can't get through with the executive team and there's a Senate, I would try the Senate. The Senate usually is composed of different representatives. Sometimes it's by population, sometimes it's by college, sometimes it's by just whatever different way, but they also have leverage. They have a speaker as well that you can speak to usually. But if that's completely not working, like you just have no success with getting through to the Student Government Association, it likely is indicative that they have other things that they're working on that are maybe taking priority at your institution. It's very specific. So I don't think that means it's game over for student participation, right? Like, especially if you're on a campus with 40,000 students, there's got to be one student who's willing to tackle this issue, especially the issue of, affordability on textbooks, if it's framed in that manner, or equity in their learning materials. Like, there are students who care about this. There's no way that your campus has none. And I think it's really just about getting the message out there and not giving up if the SGA isn't responding to you. Just trying no matter what to get students at the table. And if even that's unsuccessful, if there's no student that you're able to find to get at the table, I think framing, whatever it is that you need as we need student representation as a whole on this committee. Maybe, your school's considering inclusive access and they're going through an RFP process to find, which publisher they'll go with, whatever it is, and you're noticing that a student is not at the table and you're in a position where you can say that someone does need to be there. I think the SGA is a lot more, my guess would be that the SGA is a lot more open to saying, oh, we need student representation here and we're missing a gap here. And there's going to be a contract that goes through or something where they will send a representative. So just a few different routes to try. I wouldn't give up, especially if you've only just reached out to the student body president. Usually their inboxes are completely full with requests. So trying to go to the meetings was a really good idea. The regular meetings, usually students will stay after. You can talk to students on the floor as well. So they'll know of you and they'll come up to you if they have those similar concerns or working on initiatives like that.
I'm seeing everybody's comments.
I wanted to just really quickly build off something Winnie said too, just about the fact that students move quickly through the institution and they have different priorities year to year. I think, like Winnie said, your student government is a great place to start, but they're not your only students. Maybe there's a club or something on campus, or you just know of a student who's interested in these things. But I wanted to say as well, oh my goodness, my train of thought. Looking for students. Oh yes, so a lot of not all student organizations, but some student governments will have, whether it's a volunteer or a paid role, somebody who sort of is there year after year, whether it's as fancy as an executive director, or maybe it's just a specific volunteer who's there to support year after year. Whatever sort of serves as the institutional memory of your student government is a great place to go as well. A lot of the institutions in Canada do have student union staff. So if you've I think over the last few years, student leaders especially have been overwhelmed by, responding immediately to the needs of the pandemic. And it's true, they may only be able to handle 4 or 5 things that they're really able to prioritize that year, and OER may not always make it on the list. But is there somebody within that sort of governance structure that represents institutional memory that you can start making a connection with?
Yeah, I also think that, if you approach a student leader and you say, I have an OER initiative, and they have no idea what open education is, what OER is, it's way less likely they're interested in kind of listening more or diving into it. But if you're saying like, hey, I know that textbook affordability issues or equity in education is an issue that's on your platform that you're working towards, a general affordability. Here are some ways that this, specific program can help those things. We're, sharing common goals. This is helping you get to where you need to be for this initiative too. Just framing is also helpful for students. Yeah, textbook equity is great.
Got a lot of really good comments. I'm I
Yeah.
feel super behind on them. There was a question about the OER labeling course marking class catalogs and students choosing to take those classes and some classes with OER, but the ones that have required textbooks have less enrollment. And then the faculty with the required textbooks are, they're not happy with that label. They're not happy that there's fewer people enrolling in their courses. Is how can you approach these faculty members?
As a student,
Yeah,
I would say lower your course prices. But obviously that's not the question.
yeah. I mean, I think from the student perspective, so something I've been looking for a time to bring it up. I don't know if this is super relevant, but I've seen students do, or I guess it doesn't have to be students, but in students' course reviews, adding in a question about did you find the resource accessible? And that includes, financially. And I've found that this is not addressing your question about how to approach the disgruntled faculty, but I have found that was very motivating for faculty to receive feedback directly about the affordability of their resource. At my institution, again, I know that this isn't something that happens everywhere, but our bookstore was actually really, really on board with this issue and really, really approachable and very willing to chat with us about this. And something they told us was that a lot of times faculty members would choose a resource or a class and not actually have any idea of how much it costs. They would choose it basically because they felt it was the best fit and not really think twice. Obviously, not all faculty are doing this, but they said that there were a significant amount where they started this policy where if a book exceeded a certain price threshold, I can't remember exactly how much it was, they would notify the faculty. And of course, this was a little bit of a smaller institution, so they had the bandwidth to do this. They'd notify faculty and they'd say, hey, we got your recommendation for a book. This is how much it costs. Are you sure that you want to assign this to their students? And some faculty they never heard back from, but some faculty members were like, oh my gosh, I totally didn't realize. What can I do to fix this in the future? So those are, I think, ways that you can continue to sort of permeate this throughout the institution. Obviously, people are still going to be disgruntled. But if it becomes, if these small moves are made to just change the culture overall at your campus, it is more motivating and people may be grumpy about it. So I'm not sure how to really address that from a faculty standpoint, as I've never been faculty. But yeah, it sort of removes the the big boss like pointing down the finger and sort of spreading like the pressure from the rest of the institution rather than one person that they can focus that on.
Yeah, when I think of like faculty being upset that people aren't signing up for their classes because there's a more affordable option for students, if I'm interpreting this right, my first thing is that does faculty understand the barriers that students face when it comes to textbooks? Like, is there that understanding on the faculty side that this is even an issue? Because they might not see it as one. They might have never struggled to pay for textbooks, and they just think, well, this is how it's always been. Why not continue this? This is the way school is. You have to put in money, but a lot of students don't have the privilege to spend a lot, a lot of money on textbooks, and it often comes at sacrifices for other things. And I think the best way to start, I like to give people the benefit of doubt and just say maybe they just don't know, and just really helping them understand and have that empathy for a side that they don't relate to, can maybe say, okay, well, I've used textbooks for so long, but textbooks costs are rising. Students can't afford them. There are options out there that are just as good or even better. And letting them really know that this is for the best interest of the students and also for the best interest of learning, because, a lot of OER content is better and more inclusive, more accessible, and, coming at it with that angle. And hopefully maybe that's a very very wishful ideal way of thinking, but just really stressing that maybe they just don't know and they don't understand how big of an impact textbook costs can have on students, because it's huge for a lot of students.
Yeah. I would say one other thing kind of to add to that. So I talked about that survey earlier, and I'll share with y'all just a quick result. We asked, one of the questions was, have you discussed textbook affordability with a faculty member or course instructor? And in that survey, 78% of students said no, despite students overwhelmingly having concerns about textbook costs. So I think making it clear to the faculty member that students are not likely to approach you about this issue. And in addition to this, something that was really interesting in the pilot program that I participated in, we had a group of first year faculty instructors. So they largely taught introductory courses that were mandated. We had political science, biology, just every professor. And we were talking about textbook affordability, and they said, well, my textbook is only, $80, and we got it down to $80. And, is that currently like not affordable? Like, they were just asking a genuine question. And so being the student in the room, I was asking, okay, so your textbook is $80. And I asked what the next person's textbook cost was, and it was $80. And across the room, all of these introductory courses were $80 textbook costs. So I was telling them at the end of that, as a freshman, I could be taking 5 of their courses for a full semester. And that would put me at $400 for textbooks. And it was that minute that it kind of clicked for every faculty member, because, oftentimes they're thinking about their one course, but these students are taking 4 or 5 courses that sometimes ask for 1 or 2 different books from the class. So, putting kind of zooming out of just their class and just talking about the concern, the rising cost of textbooks as a whole might be helpful. And then just asking questions, I wouldn't start with like you're not doing this or you should not allow this, but kind of just asking like, what is it that is your concern to having these labels there? Why do you think students are choosing that? And just kind of asking questions to help them understand the concern as well. I think starting from questions would be better than just pointing fingers or anything like that. Cool.
Yeah, and I think another thing that often comes when you complain about textbooks, I don't know if anyone else experienced this, but a lot of times it's like, well, there's scholarship, there's grants, there's Pell Grants. They have those resources for students who are at a lower socioeconomic position, and a lot of scholarships don't cover textbooks. They go straight to just covering your tuition. A lot of grants do the same thing. Specifically at Montgomery College, we would get, if you're a Pell Grant recipient or a FAFSA, you got any money from FAFSA, you would get a book credit, but it wouldn't cover all your textbooks, or you could only use it in the bookstore. So your textbook might not be carried in the bookstore. So it's important to know that there's sometimes not any options for people to buy these textbooks, for students to buy them, even with the resources of like scholarships and grants and whatnot that are out there, and book credits. There's still barriers that come up. So Samantha, I see your comment. And yeah, so just having people really understand the side of being a student that struggles to pay with textbooks, and then also letting people really understand that OER, it's not just that it's more affordable, but it's also more inclusive on the accessibility side, on the content learning side, and things like that, and building that understanding between faculty and students. That was an accident.
I see Kim Hoffman, your story, and like I feel like I could tell you like 30 different stories just like that of like people who I went to university with. It's, yeah, very true. Winnie talked a lot about her like institutional survey and how awesome it was, but I think like I just really want to hammer home that idea of like, I think people just become so numb to this rhetoric of like, you know, students are broke and college is expensive. If you are in the face of, you know, an administrator or somebody who's making decisions, but is not really hearing this argument, that I think is your best bet. If you don't have that sort of institutional data that you can compare against like the state average, the provincial average, the national average, and say, you know, not only are students broke, but our students are broke, and they're, you know, more broke in this area than other students. That's a great way to have people listen, and to, you know, drive the point home. We've got about 2 minutes left. Winnie or Aisha, do you have any like parting advice for people, or?
I think maybe giving them our contact information on the last slide would be helpful. Just in case they did have any questions.
It was just a great conversation, and I loved everybody.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's always fun to like hear from Winnie and Aisha and chat a little bit more. So just, yeah, if you want to get in touch with any of us, there's our emails and our Twitter accounts. We'll be around and happy to chat students anytime.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Agreed, Zach.
Yeah, I know. I love that comment, Zach. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna stop the recording now.
Yeah, go ahead.